Good morning again, friends. Welcome back again to Karating. This is the second part or a continuation of yesterday's video about what's unique regarding construction in the village. In case you missed our video yesterday, please see the link below at Wonodede. I would recommend you watch it before you continue with the second part. But essentially, I'm just talking about some of the things I've learned that are very unique about building the village, things that folks can consider. This video is particularly important for folks who are thinking of moving from the city back to the village, or folks who are living in diaspora but are interested in setting up a project in the village. Now, if this is your first time seeing our channel, we highly recommend that you watch it. And in the end, if you find our content worthy of your time, we recommend that you subscribe. But even if that does not work for you, we are just glad that you're here. So I will not repeat everything I said in the previous video, but I'll kind of just highlight a few things. That one, when I'm talking about construction in the village, this is entirely based on my personal experience and those of my friends who are working to move back in the village. And so it's likely that some of the things that I'll talk about may not relate to your experience, and that is totally fine. So in yesterday's video, I began by highlighting about 14 things that are unique, and then I started talking about how to address some of these things. And I'll just highlight a few. I talked about the issue of labor, how costs can vary for materials, and then I talked about transportation logistics, the uniqueness about the people that work in the village in terms of expertise, and how they go about construction, the issue of pay per day, the issue of materials getting lost, which happens both in the city and the village, and then things such as superstition, especially the belief that folks who are building unusual structures are associated with Illuminati. And then, of course, we discuss cultural norms that you have to pay attention to, and then the issue of graves, and then the lack of city services in some spaces, depending on how far you are from the city. And then, of course, challenges with neighbors and permits. So again, if you really want to hear more about those issues, I highly recommend that you go check out yesterday's video. So today, again, I'm going to pick up from where we left when we were talking about how to address those specific challenges in the city. The first video covers number 1 through, I believe, number 6, which is labor, purchasing in bulk, connecting with hardware, several of them, avoiding pay per day, being careful with relatives, and of course the issue of the Illuminati. So I'm going to pick up from number 8, which is cultural norms. I would say that many folks who are built in the village, especially those who are building on ancestral land, have often had to deal with quite a few cultural norms which vary widely from one community to another, from one village to another, and even from one family to another. In general, though, some of these cultural norms are held tightly in conservative families, while in more progressive families, many of these norms really don't play a role. But nonetheless, if you're building in the village, you will likely run into this. And let me just give you examples. Those who come from my village, in my culture, the expectation that younger sons have to wait for older sons still runs pretty deep. And so the challenge with that is that when a younger son is ready to build a house, when the older son has not built theirs, sometimes they may be held back. And I've seen folks having to stay in the city for years without homes, even when they're financially ready. Now, like I said earlier, that may be held strictly or loosely depending on the family. In other cases, in terms of where you're allowed to build, especially in ancestral land, in my community, the sons' homes need to be in front of the parents' home. So generally, that is not usually a problem except for when it comes to the terrain. So if you're the older son, you're likely to build higher up the hill, and then the younger sons might build lower down the hill. And so if you are the older son and you're building up the hill, then you may have quite a bit of issues with terrain or the need for excavation and things like that. Now, the converse is also unique for younger sons who likely build much closer to, say, river catchment areas because they build much further away. So if you end up building closer to the river, then you have to worry about issues of flooding, again, depending on where you are. However, the youngest son of the family is often required to build within the parents' property. So those cultural norms may determine the specific location where a young person is required to build. And so, in fact, one that I just learned about recently was that generally in some household, they expect people to build relatively similar homes. And so if a person decides to build something unusual, then you might hear some questions popping up. Again, this may not be a big deal depending on the family you come from. And so folks who come from more progressive homes, or folks who are Christian or religious in some ways, may not have to worry about some of these issues. Now, you've heard me talk about men for the most part, because in my community, there's a very big distinction in terms of men and women around the cultural norms that are applied. Women, unfortunately, in many families, are still not allowed to inherit ancestral land. Now, while the law allows women to inherit ancestral land, in practice, though, it's not the norm everywhere. Some families are making that exception, but it is not the norm. So what I often recommend is that for young women, especially unmarried young women, to avoid many of these problems, it is often advisable to purchase land, whichever place that suits your needs. Because the land that is purchased compared to ancestral land often comes with very few strings attached to it. And so I have quite a few friends of mine who live in the diaspora, have bought lands in different places. And in those places, they get to build with very few cultural rules tied to them. So for young women specifically who are not married, it is often recommended purchase your own land and then you can do whatever you want for the most part. And even for men, the land that you purchase elsewhere, there are very few rules that apply. So if you want to get around some of these cultural norms, especially if you come from a very conservative family, I highly recommend you purchase your own land. Now, I mentioned the issue of gravesite because in the village, as compared to the city, people bury within their property. And so if you're going to build in the village, you really have to pay attention to how you're going to position your house in such a way that you account for that. Because, for example, in my community, a lot of folks bury behind the main house on the right side. So that can be a family cemetery. In a few, especially in rich families, there's often a designated gravesite. This is not the norm. I only see it almost exclusively in well-to-do families. So folks who are thinking about moving in the village, keep that in mind, that there's going to be a need to bury within your property. So account for that while positioning that house. But besides the position of the house, there are also 4 things that you want to pay attention to that are also linked to the issue of gravesite. Number 1, plumbing. When you have plumbing lines running around, you want to make sure that they are not running across areas that can be potentially used as gravesite. Now, the same also applies to extra structures within the property, such as water towers or caretaker house and things like that. If you're constructing something, keep in mind that you may need to leave some space for graves. And then underground cables. Many of us have power lines that are running underground or CCTV cables that are running around across the property. You also want to make sure that they're not running across the designated place. And the same also applies to trees, particularly permanent trees. When I say permanent trees, I mean trees that often grow very large. Some ornamental trees are very small and they don't grow too big, that's fine. But things such as eucalyptus may be problematic when they are just located or planted in places that are designated for graves. Now, point number 9, I also talked about the issue of lack of city services. Many villages, I wouldn't say all, many villages are really not connected to city services such as water, electricity, garbage disposal, and all that. So one of the things I've we've learned is that number one, it's actually a good thing to not be connected to city services because it's give you a lot of freedom. So you don't have to pay any of those bills. However, it means that as a family, you're going to be responsible for these services. Now, number one, the road leading up to your property may not be maintained by the city at all. Like in our case, there's a particular road that comes from the main road all the way up to past my parents' home. Now, that road, for as long as I've been around, is always maintained by my parents and us. If we don't fix it, nobody fixes it. So just come prepared that if you're building in the village, there's a possibility you may have to be fixing your road. In some cases, I've seen folks band up with neighbors to fix roads. I also recommend the use of biodigester. It takes a very small space, very efficient for sewerage management within your property. And then when it comes to garbage disposal, many of us build our own incinerators. So once you collect and you separate organic waste from the other waste that can be torched, we simply incinerate our garbage. And then for power, if you don't have access to the national electric grid, it's okay to put in solar. It served me so well, and I'll do a video on that in the next couple of cities. And then when it comes to water, if there are no city water services, many of us just dig wells. Unfortunately, that option may not be available in every area because in some places, wells don't have water, or if they do, they have salty water. But in many places, you can simply just dig a well and have your own water supply. I also mentioned about uniqueness of fundis. Village experts or village masons can be very unique in the way they do things. For example, my tiling guy, after I had given him instruction, he simply let me walk away, and then when I came back, he did something so far from what I told him to do. And then his explanation was that I was wrong, and he decided to change my instructions. So again, village masons can be unique. So you just have to figure out how to work with them. And then lastly, when it comes to neighbors, here my recommendation. Please don't build right away when you bought land. Help as you can, walk around, greet people, make sure you learn as much as you can. Sometimes when you don't greet people, they think you're being rude. And so just walk around, get to know folks, and again, just be as nice as you can. There's no formula to it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Bye.